Ooh, all right. Decided I'd have to get in a full walk. Whoa, what the? Somebody's obviously doing something with that. That's funny. There we go. Okay. Um, okay, so Aaron Clary's doing some research. There was something that he brought up, and he was right on the edge of a brief fold kind of thing. Okay, so he was talking about, do women want to have anything to do with men at all? All right, this is actually very Robert Briefel. No, and that would be normal of the mammalian of the mammalian kingdom, such that it's demonstrated that both cats, and camels and other forms of animals, reproduction is painful for the female. It actually can even somewhat damage the female, cause a bit of light injury. And after copulation, the female typically will actually turn and then strike at the male, or bite at the mammal male. And he was putting it in, and that he's run off. He's run away from. There's no like coupling that happens there. It's rare. We actually note the rarity of animals that have lifelong coupling. We note this. Like this is we'll have these Discover Channel specials where it'll be like, and this pair of wolves has been together for 20 years, and they've had all these, this huge pack of other wolves, and here's their wolf children, and they're all hunting and running around, yay, and well, because we're confirming something about us. And this has been done by writers who are socialist writers, who are Christian, all trying to look at zoology and anthropology through a new view, especially when trying to deal with females and males. And Briefel really nails. The more I'm finding this, that nobody's heard of the guy, but the only people who've ever heard of him are these like dangerous right-wingers. When you read it, you're like, this is brilliant. This was a brilliant set of observations. And that almost everything about it would, almost everything about it, the words would wound women. It would wound women's sensibilities. And then modernist sensibilities, it would wound liberals. So that there's got to be something to it. And what's funny is you could tell the way this guy's writing, he would have been sort of what at his time would have been sort of the anti-traditionalist type, and there's even, I bought another book that he had something to do with. It was a debate with, and he's debating somebody who's, I do believe, is debating from something more like an Orthodox Christian point of view or background. I haven't dug into it, where he's trying to really dig into this point of, no, you keep trying to make monogamy in the Christian sense something that is universal. You're trying to make it universal like God. And he's like, it's not. You have to understand that you have actually, that because then it posits that that humans can step into the evolutionary process. You see, I could see how at that time that he's proposing evolution, humans stepping into the evolutionary process by breeding people who would tend to be monogamous, because that's an oddity among humans as an animal, and that's even an oddity among mammals. The idea of lifelong mating with one mate, and then those mates staying together really out of this idea of some sense of some higher sense of loyalty or agape or love and things like that. That his argument at the time against the Christian argument was, but there's no evidence of this. Humans don't stay together, or most animals don't stay together for life. This is unique to the Christian world. And it was and so Aaron Clarey was saying something about data he's getting that's reflecting something rather dark about humans. And it's true. Women would typically be shared among a number of men who have access according to the custom of marriage, because marriage would be a loose term in our thinking, that this woman might be shared by a group of cousins or brothers. This woman might be shared by a very specific circle of men and that there's a certain man who can then allow her to be shared, a la Mr. Goldman. That's why that's not weird. That's one of the strangest parts about it. People don't really get like how not weird that behavior is, but it's weird to us in the Christian West that just have this sense of you just don't do some things like that, and it really is. It's that it's a taboo. It really is. It's a taboo to share your wife. It's a taboo to go after females under a certain age if you're a male. These are all taboos that, to a great extent, are bred for, but also could not have possibly been bred for yet. So that's why we see then this behavior that it's like for some people they would be like, how could somebody commit such a crime? Because it's utterly abhorrent to them. They've been bred against such behavior. It's not so much even teaching them, that just reinforces what's already there. And so this is something that especially Edward Dutton has had to reinforce to some degree. Molyneux has had to bring this up a lot, that he's like, no, instruction reinforces something pretty much that's already there. And that's, yeah, and so that's why there were things that people would be able to do, yet couldn't conceive of a neighboring people's ideas, or a foreign idea that came upon them that they would be like, I don't even understand what you're trying to tell me. And it's because it just hadn't been an abstraction type or a skill set that had been introduced to the society. And that's why sharing ideas is good. That's why trade and sharing ideas is, and that's what, economics, like that's a truism of economics, as you know. So like the wheel. This gets brought up a lot on the right. That the wheel, and how this was like kind of this rare tool of the certain sections of the world. And it's like, yes, because they had beasts of burden that could pull a thing that required wheels and axles. If you didn't have those beasts of burden, you could use a wheel, you could make a wheel because it's efficient, the economics of it, but you might not, you have no use for it. So building carts simply just makes no sense in almost any way, shape, or form. It's just this extra thing to do. So hence, like, kind of the way that we have to end up praising that it wasn't for environmentalism that the Incas did it all on foot. They didn't have something to pull a cart. And so it's just as amazing. That's it, economics of it. It's just amazing. So there wasn't really a reason to stay with somebody like there really wasn't some kind of evolutionary demand to stay with one mate one's whole life. to pass genes on. This never really was something that evolved without it being introduced as an idea from the outside of this small group of people from the Mediterranean world, and this new set of ideas that they had on on human behavior, and we're after over 2,000 years the results of that rather, kind of novel. It really is kind of novel. One could say it's similar to Buddhism, but it really, it could really be picked out as its own thing almost all over the world. The kind of the people who become the Christian group in their society. But yeah, the reason why Briffault's argument that we're using the wrong word in many ways for matriarchies, because he wanted to really stress this idea of that it has its own structure. So that's why he puts it as the motherhood, that it is a structure that people naturally, we had to design ourselves along so that there's a tier of mothers, and then there are greater clans of children, and the varieties of children they would have from various members of different clans. And in usually a relatively small area of about 100, 200 people for very, very, very long stretches of time. Neighboring outside peoples were just destroyed on sight for, probably about 1 million years. It was evidence, especially when the West came upon the Aboriginals of Australia, that they kind of couldn't believe what they would do to each other if they didn't know each other, and like by that time, because of course they were no longer allowed by legal structures that they had then bred into a norm of behavior, and that would be normal, so they had forgotten maybe how different Scottish clans up until probably only about 100 years prior, 200 years prior to the colonies in say Australia, that they would have seen that kind of behavior among Scottish clans, where they would be like, holy crap, these guys just wiped each other out. They just ran into each other, and it would be like, oh my gosh, like why would they take that risk? Because they had long stopped doing that. They no longer took that kind of risk. They would find another way out of it through negotiation. I see a group of men I don't know, they see us. How do we get out of this with honor and alive? This also means that you had to have bred in an honor culture, that enough people exposed each other to enough danger that honor becomes then an actual thing that men, and it's manliness, but it like it's termed as honor culture. So like people racing for pink slips, there's a sense of honor involved in that you will cough up the pinks if you lose the race. You wouldn't agree to it if you really thought you were going to lose, but that requires a sense of personal fortitude and a kind of personal integrity. All of these things are bred for, and then culture buttresses what is a long bred for set of traits chosen by the mothers. Most important of all, these traits are always chosen by the female. Briffault really gets into this. Like, without that, the whole structure of things we want to think it's something else. And he's like, it's not. Um, it is always basically the groups of females working the SMV. The men, even when men kind of organize in some way and try to, it's still the women who end up choosing who the mate is. And so bred for traits become a very important thing, because then you get the Scandinavian voter, like in Minnesota. And here in Oregon too, you get a lot of these people that, I mean, there's just some weird haze there's this, some weird haze going on. And so you get to, well, but people are they're rioting, and they're ruining where they live. Like, the Portland riots are bad. And these people can't imagine it being bad. There's some weird haze, this sort of amorphous, foggy morality and ethics that they're trying to be like, how would Marx justify this? But I don't think this person's in the cult of Marxist foppery. And I don't think this person believes in the Marxist foppery that I do. So how do I fake the funk, And and that's not. If you've ever been to a funk night in these northern states and the Northwest, you'll know you can't fake you can't fake the funk. But so I just wanted to put that out there, that what you're finding is very likely very solid data on this, because it's actually normal to the animal kingdom, especially with mammals. It's just that we've set up, our society can't exist as it does if what you are finding, it becomes a trend. And even if people were to know this, even if people were to absolutely understand, no, the reason why your cat does that when your cat ends up with another cat, that humans are the same way, and we bred a different behavior pattern within just outside of long living memory. One of the things that Briefolt will get into is how he'll actually cite ancient works and women cited as royal, like the high-ranking women in Greek society, in Roman society, and that they would have had multiple. They would have had, like, children from multiple husbands at some time. The presumption is, of course, that he died. People died of stuff all the time, and died in warfare, and died in duels and fights, and just stuff bit them and they would die. They would get a sickness and they would die, and so that's usually the presumption. The presumption is never this idea that there was actually like a cultural norm of this person could have a quasi-marriage because of their case, and then move on and and be with this other person in the Roman Senate. And we just don't really think of it that way, because but if you look into like the terms of what marriages were called, they weren't just one person, one man, one woman for their entire life, no questions asked, because women in the Roman world who are of high caste descended from a period of time where the women were actually running things. So they would own land, and that inheritance of the land was typically matrilineal. And that matrilineal inheritance meant you had to have, if you had a son from, some high-ranking woman that you wanted to stay in some kind of good way with her, whether she stayed with you or not, because you wanted that son to inherit that part of her holdings, of her clan's holdings. And so that's also then matrilocal parentage. And matrilocal parentage, the woman gathers the cubs, and that's, yeah, and that she owns them. Her and her clan own the cubs. And now, so we like trying to think of it as the way we see a pride of lions, but it's not really quite like that. I think it's more like what we see of otters or marmots or squirrels, things like that. Maybe a monkey, of some sort. But not really like this idea like, oh, and then the mighty lion goes out and he gets the tiger, and he gets the antelope, and comes home with the antelope. Honey, look, I got us an antelope. And they're like, Dad, yay, mighty lion, that. No, it's lion doggy dog, and he pimps all the hoes, and they all have his cubs, and they hunt for him because he's big as hell. And if there's any actual predators trying to eat the cubs that are his, so that they inherit that hunting territory, the hunting territory is the female's hunting territory. They're the one doing the hunting. The lion's not doing the hunting. The lionesses are doing the hunting. It's their motherhood's territory. They just need this giant lion doggy dog to protect the territory. So this is why, like, say, while there still was like hand-to-hand warfare, that we had the concept of after wars like that ended, men started to become kind of a lesser thing now in modern society. Since World War II, there's bayonets, there's bayonet warfare taught. So one of the key things is, well, what's being bred for? What's being chosen? Alan Alda. Funny, high anxiety guys. Dude who's not going to hold you very accountable for your actions. He's a guy who's pretty lucky. He's pretty lucky to get a lady like you. Oh, what a lucky guy. Oh, what a lucky boy. Good boy. Lucky boy. And, and then she takes the cubs and brings them back to her, her family. Because it would be harder to not do what is evolutionarily normal. It would and it goes against you would have to think of it. You would have to have and then also people being around people genetically similar. If you're saying a liberal enclave, people would say, well, why don't you just divorce him and live with your mom? That would be normal. People would think that that's totally normal, in some place like, I don't know, Mormon, Idaho, because there's a town called Mormon, and there, that would not be normal. And people would say, oh, well, why don't you work it out? Here's a marriage counselor I know, here's a minister I know, here's people would try to. There's actually a thing that I know Aaron Clarey would know specifically from movies and sitcoms, that there's all this kind of like the sagely advice of older people. And you had actually gotten into this with somebody recently that there wasn't an internet. So you did have kind of you had to develop a sense of people that who would be around, that they could provide you good advice because there was no internet. And now that ability to pick up on that is not as sharp, where any fool will give young people advice, and young people are like, hey, okay, whatever, so, and it's obviously sinking in. So, Yeah, and there's not this sharp, like, sort of the sharp-wittedness of, well, I don't know, this character kind of looks like an old fool, because there's none of that. You're not allowed to be judgmental. There was actually, why did people not make bad decisions in the 50s? Oh no, they made plenty of bad decisions in the 50s, but people made good decisions in the 1950s, often were what would be called now judgmental, which is actually that, yes, you should be judgmental. When you have a choice between one choice or another, you should be like a judge. And once you strike with the gavel, that's it. You have made your decision. You don't, as my teacher's grandfather had said, you don't have a problem, you just haven't made a decision. So, yes, women will try to avoid they want attention, they want to have attention paid. Evolution means they want to pass on their genes, but as you were saying, the data's coming in, people don't want to spend the energy to get the things and to get the stuff, and because that's just normal to any creature, it wants to save its energy. It doesn't want to have to stimulate itself over and over and over again. So, because that's normal, and it is sort of biological laws, and there's, until somebody rolls the rock will stay unrolled, it'll just sit there. That females are doing what is really very logical if a lazy creature that just wants to be fed food and have her whelps fed, and then have somebody entertain her whelps and her, like that's normal. Briffault really was putting forward that is normal. And so, to buttress this again, is J-Man and his genomics thing on athleticism. And he said, I don't think you guys are really being honest about what I'm telling you about the data on this. All behaviors are somewhat bred for, or entirely bred for. If you are athletic, this is a bred for trait. This is, at some point, this became a norm to some ancestor. This sort of extra bit of work to hone skill quite psychosomatically. So it doesn't mean that you've been doing, jujitsu or fencing or something for 1,000 years. It just means that something about the ardor of physical exertion and the resultant replacement of ligament and tendon and hardening of the bones and making the nervous system, making the movement more efficient. All of these things are things that it took generation after generation after generation to breed. Fundamentally, very likely by, in some way, what we would think of as physical grace would have been rewarded rather than clumsiness. And eventually you get the athletic gene, more and more and more and more and more and more and more, among a wider group. Because there'd be somebody who would be extremely skilled, but they would be a very small number until they bred a lot of skilled people, which is something like Genghis Khan, where somebody like him passed his warlord genes onto a lot of people. That means probably they had a lot of very good psychosomatic kind of body-mind connection genes. They would, they would have a tendency toward athleticism, a build for it, which would then mean that they would have a nervous system that would reinforce that, bones and bone density that would reinforce that. So, there we go. It's true. It's all true. I don't know, but I know it's the thing that you're sad for the young guys, because you want the young guys to have fun. You want the young ladies to have fun. But then you have to be like, But this is what my generation has learned. And since we've gotten this field of data, okay, okay, kids, here's, yes, but we got to tell them. We got to tell them. They have to know. All right, later.